The Spellsword is a powerful combination of mage and warrior. Heavily armored and equipped to cut enemies down with his sword, the Spellsword is adept at multiple schools of magic. He can electrocute enemies from afar, freeze their blood in their veins, and confuse them so that they turn on their own. He can also protect himself with Alteration and easily restore any lost health. If you were wondering whether Ordinator allows for seriously overpowered builds, the Storm Sword answers with a resounding yes.
And the braggart named Ragnar was boastful no more when his ugly red head rolled round on the floor.
Although a Nord by birth, the Spellsword hails from Cyrodiil and returned to his homeland for the sole purpose of assisting with resistance. His fearless, zealot-like commitment to the cause helped him to rise quickly through the ranks to the highest echelon of service, being granted the honor of joining the most elite, the Stormlords. Many in the Stormcloak ranks were not happy about this for a number of reasons, primarily due to the fact that he's a mage, and Nords hate mages, especially Nord mages. He also has a particular brand of magic that's often just as dangerous to his allies as it is to his foes. For this reason, he has been released from regular service within the army itself, and operates semi-autonomously under the direct command of Galmar Stonefest. He's allowed remarkable freedom to choose his own targets and engage the enemy when and where he sees fit, so long as he remains abreast of major operations and troop movements. I chose the Stormlord armor and Imar's Edge sword mods to go along with the Shield of Ysgramor. I also picked up a Ring of Fortify Health along the way and didn't see any great need to change it out. Let's take a look at the perks that I've chosen for the Spellsword. So, Spellswords are a cross between mage and warrior. So those are where all the perks are in, those two main branches of the perk tree. So let's start off with heavy armor. So I picked up Mastery 2 out of 2, Heavy Armor Fit, and Face of Death. Now, Face of Death is mainly just that I could look nice without a helmet, but other than that, it's totally cosmetic. I also picked up Battle Weary, so that enemies do less damage as their stamina decreases, and Born to Fight, so that my armor weighs less and slows me down half as much. Next we have Block. Only took 2 skills, Block Mastery 2 out of 2, and Timed Block 2 out of 2, just to give my shield a bit more oomph, I guess you could say. For one-handed, it was pretty much a focus on doing more damage. So we have Mastery 2 out of 2, Furious Strength, which increases the damage output of power attacks, Disciplined Fighter, which reduces the stamina requirements for power attacks, Clash of Champions, which decreases the attack damage of the target that you're hitting, so that if you're in close quarters and you're hitting them, you're reducing the damage that they're dealing to you right back. And Crosscut 2 out of 2, which increases the power attack damage as you do regular attacks that are not blocked. So if you're fighting somebody who doesn't block, or you manage to get attacks in that they don't block, that increases the damage output of your power attacks, which, you know, ties in with Furious Strength. Now let's move on to the magic schools. Starting with Illusion, all I took here was Mastery 2 out of 2 and Dual Casting. And that was because it was basically just to increase the duration. Although I think it had some effect on, at least Mastery has some effect on the level cap for enemies that you can cast illusion spells on. But I mainly used it just to increase the duration. So for example, if I cast Frenzy, like dual casted Frenzy, basically a bunch of bandits would continue fighting each other until there's like one left standing. Don't have to worry about it running out in mid-battle. Next we have Destruction. So this is all about more and more damage. I picked the two elements that I went with was Frost and Shock. So I took Mastery 2 out of 2 and Dual Casting. Now as you'll see later on, I didn't need the cost reduction of Mastery, so I just used it to increase the power of my spells. So I took Merciless Cold 2 out of 2, increased the damage of my Frost spells, and Frost Fall, which reduces the attack damage of their target. So that ties in nicely with that one-handed perk as well. And for dealing with mages, I took Ionized Path 2 out of 2, and Static Field, which essentially does an extra 25% damage, which is quite nice. Well, up to 25% extra damage. For Restoration, I took Mastery 2 out of 2 and Dual Casting. Once again, this was to cause my Restoration spells primarily to be more powerful, so they would heal more damage. Same thing with Edgewalker. So the weaker I am, the more powerful my Restoration spells are. Descending Light, I took this, which was useful in the beginning of the game, because it increases your magicka regeneration when you enter combat, which is really useful. But later in the game, it was used primarily just so that I could get to Overflowing Cup, which when you're entering, before you enter combat, you can cast a healing spell, and it'll increase essentially your health by 100 points, because it's 1 point per level of restoration for the first 20 seconds of the fight. Finally, let's take a look at Alteration, which is the tree that I put the most perks into. I took Mastery only 1 out of 2, and you'll see why I did that shortly. So that reduces the cost of magicka, which doesn't matter because I took Vancian Magic, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it does increase the duration of Alteration spells, as does Dual Casting, which I also took. Now, up the middle of the tree, Alter Self Resistances, I took Fire and Shock, I believe, if I remember correctly. In the beginning of the game, that was important. The Shock was important because when I fought mages, I wouldn't lose as much magicka to if they were casting shock magic at me. Later in the game, it was just basically to reduce the damage I was taking, and that's it. I also took Alter Self Attributes, and I ended up using Health. I did try magicka just to see if it have any effect on one of the other Vancian Magic perks, and it does not. So keep that in mind. It won't increase the number of Vancian Magic spells that you can cast. So don't bother wasting your time with that. So I just put it into Health, which was really nice. I also took Home Mythal, or Mythal, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. This is a very interesting perk. It summons a permanent magical field at the location where you learn the perk. Alteration spells cast within 5,000 feet of that field get an extra 2 times duration, and if they're cast within 250 feet, it's 50 times duration. Additionally, Vancian magic can be recharged by sleeping within 250 feet. I also picked up Dimensional Door, which once a day gives you a power so that you can open up a magical doorway that teleports you to your home Mythal, so you can recharge your magic and recast alteration spells, for example, flesh spells, and they will last 50 times as long. I also, because I'm a spell sword, I took Spellblade, which, when you cast a spell in one-handed, you deal 20% more attack damage for 4 seconds. Energy Royal, whenever you cast a spell in one hand, it reduces the armor of nearby enemies for 4 seconds. And Rend Resistances, when you attack with a weapon, it reduces the magic resistance of nearby enemies for 4 seconds. So this is great if you alternate between a destruction spell and your sword. Basically, they will be feeding off of each other and boosting each other's damage. Now for the big one, Vancian Magic. Cast magic like the wizards of old. Your next 20 spells do not use magicka and are twice as effective. But when you run out of spells, you're unable to cast spells until you rest by sleeping at an inn or in your home, or with the home Mythal. You can rest within 250 feet of the home Mythal. So you could set that up in some bandit camp somewhere if you really like to do that, because you can already recharge your Vancian magic in inns or homes. Next up, we have Quadratic Wizard. Whenever you recharge your Vancian magic spells, you gain 1 additional Vancian magic spell for each 10 points of base magicka.
No offense.
I did not test whether that is affected by Fortify magic garments or jewelry or whatever, so you might want to try that out in your build. It probably doesn't, because the creators of Ordinator usually thought about that kind of thing. But anyway, even though once I got Vancian magic, I didn't use magicka to cast spells, I did increase my base magicka to 200, which gave me basically double. I went from 20 Vancian magic spells to 40 Vancian magic spells. Dungeon Master. This is a crazy, crazy perk. Whenever you recharge your Vancian magic spells, you may choose less or more spells in exchange for increased or decreased spell effectiveness, and or choose one of 3 meta magic enhancements. Your choice remains in effect until your next rest. Now this allows you to mold your spell, and this really works well for spell swords. It allows you to mold your spell sword so that you can, for example, I'll just activate it here and talk as I read it. You can, the percentages are, you can go for broad, which is 50% more spells for 50% less spell effectiveness. Now, keep in mind that Vancian magic already doubles the effectiveness of spells, so if you take broad, you'll be able to cast 50% more spells, and they'll be the same power as if you were not using Vancian magic. So essentially, your spells would be no more powerful than any other mage, and you'd be able to cast up to, in my case, up to 60 spells with no magicka. You can also just choose Disciplined, which is no modifiers, so you get the same. You can cast the same number of spells as Vancian magic normally allows, and they're double the effectiveness, so it doesn't have any effect. The other option is Focused, which is 50% less spells, so that in my case that would reduce me from 40 to 20, which is the normal Vancian magic number of spells. In exchange, you get 50% more effectiveness. And let's say you choose Focused. For the meta magic, you have 3 options. So you can choose none of the above, or you can choose any of these 3 options. Weapon Proficiency. When you are out of spells, you gain 20% extra attack damage and critical damage. Epic Finale. when you have 10 or less spells remaining, your spells are 20% more effective. And I did verify that that stacks with the focused bonus of 50%. And finally, Life Tap. You are able to cast when you're out of spells, but you take a cumulative 40 damage for each spell cast this way. So essentially that would turn you into a blood mage, which I decided not to go down that route with my Spellsword, but you're free to do that if you like. The weapon proficiency is of course really nice for a Spellsword because Spellswords are proficient warriors, and when you run out of magicka, you can have extra attack damage, which is quite useful. Now the way I was thinking that you can use this particular perk to kind of mold your character is, let's say you could use Broad, so you can cast more spells but they're less effective when you're just going about doing random adventuring, and when you know that you're going to go into a fight, you can go with focused, so you'll do less spells but you can do more damage. That's one way I was thinking of making use of it. Tell me in the comments how you used your Spellsword with all these crazy perks. One final note, I just wanted to send out a special thanks to Mad King CF, since I didn't get a chance in the last build video, but he actually supported both the building of the Spellsword and the building of the Bard last week with donations. So I really appreciate that. Just wanted to say thank you very much.
This feels like the right way. I'm starting to worry. Who's there? Where'd you come from?